Arizona 2010. A cold case that haunted a desert town for over a decade has finally been solved. Brielle Noelle Martinez, a 26-year-old veterinary clinic assistant known for her gentle heart and infectious laugh, vanished without warning one warm summer evening. Her car was discovered idling on a remote service road, keys in the ignition, driver's door ajar, no sign of struggle. For years, police faced dead ends, unanswered calls, and a silence that stretched endlessly. Rumors swirled, leads evaporated, and her family's hope dimmed. Until now. A breakthrough in DNA evidence would shake the community and expose a chilling truth. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Mesa, Arizona, in 2010 was a sun-baked stretch of suburbia where neighbors knew each other by name and people still left their doors unlocked. It was a place that prided itself on its community feel, where kids played in cul-de-sacs and the local vet clinic knew every family pet by heart. And in the center of it all was Brielle Noelle Martinez. At 26, Brielle had built a quiet, meaningful life. She worked full-time as a veterinary clinic assistant at Desert Grove Animal Hospital, a modest but respected establishment near the downtown corridor. Clients loved her for her gentleness with animals and her patience with anxious pet owners. Colleagues praised her reliability and warmth. She wasn't someone who sought the spotlight. She preferred to be the steady presence, the one behind the scenes making sure everything ran smoothly. Brielle was born and raised in Mesa. Her father had passed away from a sudden illness when she was just 9, leaving her mother, Elena, to raise Brielle and her younger brother, Mateo, on her own. Despite the early loss, the Martinez household was filled with love and resilience. Brielle became a second caretaker in many ways, helping raise Mateo, managing household tasks, and eventually supporting her mother emotionally through the years. Her devotion to animals began early. At 12, she brought home a stray cat she'd found near her school, patchy-furred and barely breathing. She nursed it back to health with the help of the neighborhood vet, and from then on, her path was clear. On weekends, she volunteered at local shelters. Her dream was simple but heartfelt, to open her own animal rescue center one day, one that specialized in neglected and abused pets. Outside of work, she lived a modest life. She rented a one-bedroom apartment just a few miles from her clinic, often spent evenings cooking simple meals or watching documentaries about animal conservation. She wasn't a social butterfly, but she had a close-knit circle of friends who described her as the glue, always showing up when it mattered. Every night without fail, she'd call her mother. Sometimes it was just a check-in, other times long talks about the future or reminiscing over memories of her father. Her life was not without hardship. She had experienced heartbreak. A short-lived but intense relationship had ended a year before. But she bore it the way she carried most of her burdens, quietly and with grace. Her co-workers never saw her unravel. If she was hurting, she buried it beneath a smile and a focused work ethic. In the weeks before her disappearance, everything seemed normal. Brielle maintained her routine: early mornings at the clinic, brief coffee stops at her favorite cafe, weekend shelter visits, and those nightly calls home. Nothing felt off. No strange behavior. No paranoia. No noticeable stress. To her mother, to her friends, to her co-workers, Brielle was just Brielle, steady, calm, grounded. There were no signs of a storm brewing beneath the surface. No cryptic journal entries. No unexplained absences. No secrets that anyone could point to. In a town where rumors moved faster than traffic, there were none about her. Not even whispers. She was a woman anchored in her community. She knew the local baristas by name, waved to the elderly man who walked his dog every morning, and brought homemade treats to the clinic staff on Fridays. She wasn't just liked. She was quietly cherished by those who knew her. That's what made her sudden vanishing all the more haunting. What could cause someone like Brielle, so rooted in routine and community, to simply vanish into the desert air? Saturday, July 17, 2010, began like any other summer day in Mesa, Arizona. The heat was relentless, with temperatures climbing well past 100 degrees. For most, it was a weekend for errands or staying inside with the air conditioning humming. For Brielle Noelle Martinez, it was a typical workday at the veterinary clinic. She clocked out shortly before 4 p.m., thanked the receptionist, and waved goodbye to her coworkers as she stepped into the sunlight. That afternoon, she texted her mother a brief message, heading to the store before home. Need anything? It was routine, Another small check-in in the long thread of their daily conversations. But after that message, everything stopped. By 6:30 p.m., her mother, Elena, began to worry. Brielle was never careless with time. She'd always call if she was delayed, even by a few minutes. By 7 p.m., Elena was dialing Brielle's number repeatedly. No answer. Straight to voicemail. The calls kept going out, the silence growing heavier with each ring. Brielle's brother, Matteo, began texting her friends. Had anyone seen her? Heard from her? No one had. Later that night, just after 10 p.m., the first clue emerged. A cell phone ping, Brielle's last known signal, was picked up by a tower near State Route 88. It was an isolated road, winding through cactus-strewn terrain toward the Superstition Mountains. Not a typical route for groceries, and certainly not a place she was known to frequent. Then, just before midnight, a 911 call came in. A motorist had spotted an abandoned vehicle pulled off to the shoulder of Route 88, near a service access road. The engine was running. The driver's door was wide open. The car belonged to Brielle. Police arrived on scene within the hour. Her gray Toyota Corolla sat silently beneath the moonlight, headlights casting an eerie glow across the dry brush. Inside, her purse was undisturbed on the passenger seat. Her keys were still in the ignition. The air conditioning was running. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away. To investigators, it looked as though she had simply vanished. By dawn, the Martinez family and a growing group of volunteers had gathered near the scene. Search and rescue teams deployed helicopters, drones, and scent dogs. Off-road vehicles combed the surrounding desert. The terrain was brutal, hot, unforgiving, with rocky outcrops and deceptive ravines. But despite hours of searching, not a single trace of Brielle emerged. No torn fabric, no dropped phone, nothing. Word spread quickly through the community. Flyers were printed overnight and taped to storefronts. Local news stations aired the story with somber headlines. 26-year-old woman vanishes after leaving work. Her co-workers were interviewed, describing her as someone with no enemies, no troubling relationships. Police questioned family and friends, looking for any sign that she had left voluntarily. But there was nothing. No packed bags, no bank activity, no digital breadcrumbs. What struck investigators most was the scene itself. The car hadn't broken down. There was no mechanical failure. It was still running. Cold air still poured through the vents when officers arrived. It was as if she had stepped out expecting to return in seconds, but never did. Some theorized she had gotten lost or had a medical episode. Others feared a predator had taken advantage of an isolated stretch of road and an unsuspecting woman. There was even a whisper of desert folklore. People who disappeared in the Superstition Mountains were sometimes never found. But this wasn't a hiker or a tourist. This was Brielle. She hadn't planned to be there. Was this a voluntary disappearance? Or had something sinister unfolded in those final minutes? 3 weeks after Brielle Martinez vanished into the Arizona heat, the desert gave up one of its secrets. It was a blistering August morning when a lone hiker, Matthew Green, decided to take a lesser-known trail near Saguaro Lake. An avid outdoorsman, Matthew had explored the area many times before. But that day he veered slightly off course, following the call of curiosity toward a rocky outcrop partially hidden by mesquite and palo verde trees. What he found would haunt him for years. Amid the brush and scattered debris, something unnatural caught his eye. At first it appeared to be a torn piece of clothing tangled in dry undergrowth, but as he stepped closer, a distinct shape emerged. Bones, partially covered by a thin layer of dirt and brittle branches, a faded strip of denim. Then, just beneath the skeletal remains, something metallic glinted in the sunlight. It was a necklace. A delicate silver chain with a small paw-shaped pendant, the same pendant Brielle Martinez had worn every day at the clinic. A symbol of her devotion to animals, always visible around her neck. Authorities were called immediately. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office sealed off the area and brought in forensic teams. What remained of the body was badly decomposed after weeks of exposure, but dental records would soon confirm what the pendant already suggested. It was Brielle. The confirmation shattered what little hope remained for her family. Elena Martinez collapsed at the news, clutching her son Mateo in the living room where photos of Brielle still lined the walls. The community, too, fell into mourning. The missing person flyers were replaced with memorial candles and bouquets at the site where her car had been found. The autopsy delivered more troubling news. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull, delivered with enough force to render unconsciousness or death immediately. However, the forensic pathologist noted there were no signs of sexual assault, nor were there defensive wounds on the arms or hands. It was swift, calculated, cold. Even more perplexing was what wasn't found. Her cell phone, her wallet, her shoes, all missing. The items might have offered clues, fingerprints, or traces of where she'd been. But instead, they had simply vanished, as though someone had taken deliberate steps to erase a part of her story. There was no robbery, no struggle, no apparent motive. She hadn't been dumped hastily. The killer had taken time, however brief, to conceal her body beneath brush and debris, perhaps hoping nature would finish the job. But it hadn't, and now detectives were staring at their first real mystery. Who would do this? Brielle was not involved in any dangerous circles. She had no criminal history, no romantic entanglements that raised flags. Her life, by all accounts, was one of peace and purpose. She had friends. She had family. She had a future. The initial theory leaned toward a crime of opportunity, perhaps a stranger who had lured her out of her car under false pretenses. Someone who had offered help, then turned violent. But there were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, and no DNA immediately recoverable from the remains. Detectives followed every imaginable lead. They re-interviewed friends, ex-boyfriends, co-workers. They reviewed traffic cameras, searched the nearby lake for discarded evidence, and canvassed the road where her car was found. But each path led to the same place. Nowhere. The weight of uncertainty began to settle over the investigation. With no suspects and no witnesses, would this case be solved or buried by the desert sands? In the weeks following the discovery of Brielle Noelle Martinez's body, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office launched a full-scale investigation. The urgency was palpable. This wasn't just a murder, it was a disruption of public trust. A young woman had disappeared in broad daylight and turned up dead under deeply unsettling circumstances. Detectives knew the clock was ticking. They began with the people closest to her. Co-workers at the veterinary clinic were brought in for interviews. All described Brielle as calm, professional, and universally well-liked. None could think of anyone who would want to harm her. She had no known enemies, no recent conflicts, no incidents at work. Her calendar was reviewed, appointments, routines, schedules, and everything aligned with a woman simply going about her normal life. Next came friends, former classmates, and acquaintances. Detectives scoured text messages, call logs, and social media messages. One name came up more than once: Dylan Reese, a former boyfriend Brielle had dated 2 years prior. Friends mentioned the relationship had ended amicably, but that Dylan had shown signs of possessiveness during their time together. When questioned, Dylan was cooperative, but his timeline didn't add up. He claimed to have been out of town during Brielle's disappearance, visiting family in Flagstaff. However, cell phone tower data contradicted him. His phone had pinged a tower just 2 miles from State Route 88 on the same night Brielle vanished. He was brought in for formal questioning. For a brief moment, it felt like the case had cracked open. Detectives pressed Dylan for hours. He became defensive, then quiet. He admitted to lying about his whereabouts, saying he didn't want to look suspicious. But despite the inconsistencies, there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime. DNA samples taken from his clothing, vehicle, and apartment showed no match to the scene, no trace of Brielle. He was released, though the shadow of suspicion lingered. With Dylan ruled out, investigators hit a wall. There were no known stalkers. Brielle hadn't received threatening messages, no suspicious activity online, no sign that she had been watched or followed. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses and traffic cams yielded nothing usable. No suspicious vehicles. No witnesses recalling anything out of the ordinary. In parallel, search teams revisited the area around Saguaro Lake. Divers were sent in to recover potential evidence from the shoreline and underwater drop points. Dozens of volunteers combed surrounding trails looking for discarded items, her phone, wallet, anything. But nothing surfaced. Meanwhile, the community rallied. Candlelight vigils were held in downtown Mesa. Flyers with Brielle's smiling face were posted on lampposts and pinned to bulletin boards at grocery stores and coffee shops. Her story aired on local news stations and even drew brief national attention. Crime Watch forums lit up with theories, amateur sleuths trading clues and timelines. Still, no real leads emerged. By early October, the investigation began to slow. The summer heat had faded into the dry, dusty winds of fall, and with it the pace of the case. The flood of tips slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Detectives who had once worked around the clock were reassigned. Brielle's case file thickened, filled with reports, interviews, and unanswered questions, but no resolution. For the Martinez family, the silence was unbearable. Elena refused to take down her daughter's photos. Mateo visited the trailhead where her car was found every week, placing fresh flowers in the same spot. They pushed for updates constantly, but all they received were polite assurances and no answers. As the first anniversary loomed in the distance, one question began to echo louder than the rest. Would Brielle's case fade into another unsolved file buried in the department's archives? By the summer of 2011, a suffocating stillness had settled over Brielle Noelle Martinez's case. What had once been a flurry of searches, interviews, and news coverage was now reduced to silence, a quiet as heavy as the desert air at dusk. The early leads had evaporated. No new evidence surfaced. The phone at the Martinez home no longer rang with updates from detectives. It rang only with condolences. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office classified the case as inactive, a cold case. The words alone felt like a betrayal. For Elena Martinez, Brielle's mother, it meant something unthinkable. Her daughter's story had joined the long list of Arizona's unsolved homicides. But while the official investigation slowed to a crawl, Helena refused to let her daughter fade into the background of statistics and headlines. She became a relentless advocate. Letters poured out from her kitchen table, requests to senators, governors, and police chiefs, asking for renewed attention to unsolved crimes. She reached out to journalists, hoping to keep Brielle's name in the public eye. On weekends, she attended meetings of Families for Justice, a local support group for relatives of missing and murdered victims. Her pain became her purpose. Brielle's brother Mateo grieved in quieter ways. He returned to the places his sister loved, the animal shelter, the family home, and tried to maintain the fragments of normalcy she left behind. But every room whispered her absence. Brielle's bedroom remained untouched, bed neatly made, veterinary textbooks stacked on the nightstand, and the faint scent of lavender from her favorite candle lingering in the air. Elena couldn't bring herself to change a thing. The community, once so loud in its support, began to move on. The posters came down. The vigils grew smaller. Her co-workers at the clinic, still mourning, found a way to honor her legacy. They planted a small memorial garden behind the building. A plaque beneath a mesquite tree read, "In loving memory of Brielle, whose kindness touched every life she met." But even gestures of remembrance couldn't fill the void. For law enforcement, the trail had gone cold in every direction. Detectives came and went, some retiring, others reassigned. The case file, now several inches thick, gathered dust in the cold case unit's archive room. Inside were pages of interviews, maps marked with circles, lab reports with inconclusive results, a mosaic of effort without resolution. Occasionally, Helena received brief updates. A new detective had been assigned, a piece of evidence was being re-examined. Each time, her hope reignited, only to be extinguished when no results followed. Months turned into years. Leads turned into memories. By 2015, the media had stopped calling altogether. Brielle's name appeared only in small anniversarial mentions. 5 years since the Mesa veterinary assistant vanished. For Elena, each story reopened the wound. For Mateo, it was a reminder that time could heal everything except unanswered questions. Still, Elena kept fighting. She wrote to the department every few months, urging them to test older evidence with advancing forensic technologies. She believed, perhaps stubbornly, that something tangible remained, something science could one day decode. But resources were limited, and cold cases rarely drew priority over fresh crimes. For more than a decade, Brielle's murder lived in limbo, a file buried beneath years of bureaucracy and fading memories. Her mother's faith, however, never wavered. She told friends, "I'll know when justice is coming. I'll feel it. And then 13 years after the night Brielle disappeared, the call finally came. What happens when justice feels completely out of reach? And then, unexpectedly, the phone rings? By 2022, the file marked Brielle Noelle Martinez, homicide, had sat cold for over a decade. Dozens of cases just like it sat in the same archive room, each a portrait of heartbreak stalled by science, silence, or circumstance. But a new initiative within the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office changed everything. A grant-funded partnership had been formed between the cold case unit and a private forensic genealogy lab out of California, one of a growing number across the country making headlines for their role in solving decades-old crimes. This lab used cutting-edge technology to extract DNA from degraded evidence that had previously yielded no usable results. Detective Alana Frey, recently reassigned to the Martinez case, pulled the file again. She read every page, combed every report, and made a decision. She would submit a tiny strand of hair recovered from Brielle's blouse, collected during her original autopsy but never successfully analyzed due to degradation. Using advanced DNA enrichment protocols, the lab was able to extract a partial but viable genetic profile. It wasn't complete enough for a direct CODIS hit, the federal database used to identify known offenders, but it was enough to begin a genealogical search. The process was intricate and required patience. The lab uploaded the DNA into publicly accessible genealogical databases, sites where people submit their DNA to trace ancestry or find long-lost relatives. Weeks passed, then a match came back. Not a suspect, but a familial connection. A second cousin. Someone who, based on generational charts, shared ancestry with the unknown killer. The cold case team launched into a quiet but intense background investigation. They built family trees, traced marriages, births, and obituaries. They narrowed down branches looking for men who had lived in or near Mesa at the time of Brielle's death, men who matched the genetic markers, who had gone unnoticed for years. Then a name surfaced, Samuel Decker. He was 43 now. Back in 2010, he had lived just a few miles from where Brielle's car was discovered, working as an independent contractor specializing in roadside fencing and property lines, work that often took him near the desert's edge. He had no criminal record, no known interaction with Brielle, no ties to the veterinary clinic or her social circle. To most, he was invisible, a ghost in the background. But when his name crossed Detective Frey's desk, something clicked. She pulled archived utility data from 2010, cell tower pings, vehicle registration logs, and nearby repair permits. One of Decker's old job sites aligned almost exactly with the time and place where Brielle's phone last pinged. Investigators began building a profile. They placed him under discreet surveillance, watching his routines, noting his behaviors. Eventually, they obtained a discarded coffee cup from a trash can outside a gas station he frequented. That cup was rushed to the forensic lab. The results were undeniable. The DNA on the coffee lid matched the partial profile from the hair found on Brielle's blouse. A familial confirmation turned into a direct hit. 13 years after Brielle's murder, investigators had a suspect. One no one had ever considered. One who had moved freely through the world while a family mourned and a community waited for answers. Detective Frey prepared the affidavit. She thought about Elena and Mateo Martinez, about the desert trail, about the necklace, about every unanswered question that had lived in the shadows for so long. Samuel Decker's name had not appeared once in the original investigation. Could this newly identified suspect finally unravel the truth about what happened that night? On a crisp morning in late November 2023, as the sun rose over Mesa, Arizona, law enforcement agents moved in on a small single-story home tucked behind a quiet cul-de-sac. The man inside had no idea his life was about to change, or that a secret he'd kept for 13 years was finally unraveling. Samuel Decker, 43 years old, was arrested without incident. To neighbors, Decker was unremarkable. A blue-collar contractor who kept to himself, paid his bills on time, and was polite in passing. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no presence in any police database. He was just a face at the gas station, a man in line at the hardware store, a ghost in plain sight, but to detectives, he was now the prime suspect in one of Arizona's most haunting cold cases. At the sheriff's office, Decker sat in a small interrogation room under the fluorescent glare. He initially denied everything, said he didn't know Brielle, claimed he had never seen her before, but when confronted with the DNA match, his saliva from a discarded coffee cup matching the degraded hair found on Brielle's clothing, and a reconstructed timeline placing him near the trailhead that night, his posture shifted. He slumped forward, silent at first. Then slowly the truth began to spill out. He said he had seen Brielle pulled over on State Route 88, claimed her car appeared to be overheating. He stopped to offer help, being neighborly. She was hesitant but accepted. At some point during the interaction, his version vague and inconsistent, Brielle reportedly tried to leave. Something triggered an argument. He described it as a misunderstanding but never specified what it was. That's when it turned violent. In what he called a moment of panic, he struck her. Once, she fell. He panicked, fled, and returned later that night to move her body off the road and into the brush near Saguaro Lake. He removed her phone and shoes, details only the killer would know, and disposed of them separately. He claimed it was never premeditated, that it just happened. Detectives didn't believe everything he said. The motive remained unclear. Had he tried to abduct her? Was it an attempted assault gone wrong? Or had he simply lashed out in a moment of rage? He offered no further clarity. He showed little emotion, no tears, no remorse. The news of the arrest hit Mesa like a shockwave. Samuel Decker had lived among them all these years, gone to the same grocery stores, walked the same sidewalks. He had driven past the same memorials built for the woman whose life he ended. Some locals had even waved at him in passing, unaware of the dark secret he carried. Brielle's family was notified immediately. Elena Martinez wept. She'd waited 13 years for a name, any name. Now she had one. Her son Mateo, overcome with emotion, said only, "It's finally real." The public response was swift and intense. News outlets picked up the story across the state. "Cold case breakthrough in Mesa," the headlines read. "DNA links quiet contractor to 2010 murder." Community members lit candles again, this time not in grief, but in solemn recognition that justice had taken a step forward. But the arrest was just the beginning. What would come next was a legal process long delayed, courtrooms, testimony, and the challenge of proving guilt beyond a confession. Brielle's story had returned to the public eye, and now the eyes of Arizona and the nation were watching. Would the courtroom deliver the justice Brielle's family waited 13 years for? In January 2024, nearly 14 years after Brielle Noelle Martinez vanished on a hot July night, her name echoed through a courtroom for the first time. The trial of Samuel Decker opened in Maricopa County Superior Court. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Family, friends, former co-workers, local reporters, and strangers moved by a case that had long haunted the Arizona community. At the front sat Elena and Mateo Martinez, hands clasped tightly, hearts braced for a truth they already knew but would now have to hear spoken aloud. The prosecution opened with a stark declaration. Brielle had died not from accident, but from choice. They described Decker's actions as predatory and deliberate, a man who offered help, gained trust, and turned violent when he couldn't control the narrative. They played the taped confession to the jury, Decker's flat tone as he admitted to striking Brielle, covering her body, discarding her belongings. It filled the room with a chilling quiet. Forensic experts were called to the stand. A DNA analyst testified to the process of extracting the degraded sample from Brielle's blouse and matching it to Decker's discarded coffee cup. A crime scene reconstructionist explained how Brielle's car placement, belongings, and the nature of her injuries all pointed to an intentional act. Not panic, not a mistake, but a violent decision followed by a calculated cover-up. The defense painted a different picture. They admitted Decker caused her death but insisted it was an accident, a confrontation gone tragically wrong. They pushed for manslaughter, not murder, claiming there was no evidence of premeditation. They leaned on Decker's clean criminal record, his cooperation during interrogation, and his expression of remorse. But the jury wasn't swayed. One of the trial's most emotionally charged moments came when Elena Martinez took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement. She brought with her a framed photo of Brielle in her veterinary scrubs, holding a rescue puppy to her chest. Her voice trembled, but she didn't waver. She was gentle, Elena told the court. She was kind. She helped others because she believed in compassion. And he took her from us for what? Because she said no? Because she tried to walk away? Many in the room were in tears. Even court officers appeared visibly moved. After 8 days of testimony and argument, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 7 hours. On February 2, 2024, the verdict was read aloud, guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom held its breath. The sentence followed shortly after, 35 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called Decker a danger who robbed a family and community of a bright light, and a man who hid behind silence while others lived in grief. For Elena and Mateo, justice had finally arrived. It didn't bring Brielle back. It didn't erase the pain or the years of waiting. But it answered the question that had haunted them for over a decade. Someone was responsible, and that someone would now pay. Reporters flooded the courthouse steps. Local headlines read, "Justice at last for Brielle Martinez." The community gathered again, this time not for a vigil, but for a celebration of accountability. For closure. But as the courthouse emptied and the reporters packed away their gear, another question lingered, one that wasn't about the trial or the sentence, but about what came next. But beyond the verdict, what lasting legacy would Brielle's story leave behind? Brielle Noelle Martinez's life didn't end in the desert. It began again, in quiet gestures, in growing voices, in a community that refused to let her memory vanish. After the trial, Elena Martinez channeled her grief into something larger than justice. In the months following Samuel Decker's sentencing, she stepped into the public eye not just as a mother of a murdered daughter, but as an advocate for change. She spoke at town halls, crime victim panels, and law enforcement conferences, calling for greater resources for cold case investigations and the expansion of forensic genealogy programs. "Our children don't get a second chance," she told one audience, "but the science that exists now can give families like mine the answers we've waited years to hear, if only we invest in it." Her voice reached state lawmakers. In 2025, a bipartisan bill known as the Martinez Initiative passed in Arizona, allocating funding toward cold case units across the state, including partnerships with private DNA labs. Brielle's name was now attached to something powerful, progress, but her legacy didn't stop at legislation. Back in Mesa, a local nonprofit partnered with Brielle's former veterinary clinic to launch the Brielle Haven Foundation, the very rescue initiative she had once dreamed of opening. With support from the community, the foundation built a small facility dedicated to rehabilitating abandoned and abused animals. Its motto, engraved on the front gate, read, "Gentleness is strength." Former co-workers now volunteered there. So did schoolchildren who grew up hearing Brielle's story. A wall in the lobby displayed her photo, smiling, arms wrapped around a terrier rescued just days before she disappeared. And for students who shared her passion, a new opportunity took root. The Brielle N. Martinez Veterinary Sciences Scholarship was established at the local community college. Each year it awards tuition support to aspiring veterinary technicians, young people who, like Brielle, want to make a difference for those without a voice. The first recipient wrote a letter to Elena saying, "I didn't know your daughter, but she's inspired me more than anyone else I've ever met." The community, too, kept her close. Every July they held a candlelight vigil near Saguaro Lake, close to where Brielle was found but far enough to feel safe. What began with a few friends and family had grown into a full event, with hundreds gathering under the stars. They shared memories, read poetry, played Brielle's favorite songs, and released lanterns across the water. Some came to mourn. Others came to heal. All came to remember. Even those who had never known her found meaning in her story. She became a symbol, not of tragedy but of endurance, of how one life, cruelly cut short, could still spark ripples of good. In police academies, her case became a teaching example for forensic genealogy breakthroughs. In high school classrooms, students studied the legislation born from her loss. Time had not erased her. It had given her new form. Mateo, now a father himself, would someday tell his daughter about the aunt she never met. He'd show her pictures of Brielle holding baby animals, read her the stories written about her case, and explain how a single act of violence could never silence a legacy built on kindness. Because Brielle wasn't just a victim. She was a sister, a daughter, a healer, and now a name tied to justice and hope. When justice finally arrives, what echoes does it leave behind in the hearts of the living? 13 years passed between the moment Brielle Noelle Martinez disappeared into the Arizona night and the day her name was finally spoken in a courtroom with truth, clarity, and justice. Her killer, Samuel Decker, had remained hidden in plain sight, unremarkable and unnoticed, while Brielle's loved ones carried the weight of her absence every single day. But the silence was broken by a thread of DNA, a strand of hair, and the unwavering determination of a family that refused to give up. Technology may have delivered the evidence, but it was persistence, human, aching, relentless, that carried it across the finish line. Still, this story was never just about a confession or a verdict. It was about who Brielle was before the violence. A daughter who called her mother every night. A sister who helped raise her younger brother. A caretaker of the voiceless. She lived her life with intention, with kindness, and with a quiet strength that continues to echo in the lives she touched and the lives she never got to meet. Today, her legacy exists in more than words. It lives in the Brielle Haven Foundation, where abandoned animals now find safety and love. It lives in scholarships that help students step into veterinary careers with the same compassion Brielle embodied. It lives in candles lit on warm July evenings, in legislative reform, and in every voice that says her name aloud so she's never forgotten. The Arizona 2010 cold case, once buried by silence, is now a powerful example of what can happen when a community stands united. When forensic innovation meets heart, and when one family's refusal to stop asking why finally yields an answer. Brielle's story reminds us that justice may take time, but time does not diminish its power. So before you go, remember this: justice delayed is not justice denied. Share her story, say her name. Let her light continue to shine, even in the darkest corners of forgotten cases.